Dave, Dave Seaver is a solutions architect and strategic estimation lead at General Dynamics Information Technology. Prior to this experience, he was the technical expert for software estimation and division chief at the NSA, National Security Agency Cost Shop. Over to you, Dave. I can't hear you, by the way.
Can you see my slides?
Yes, and now I can hear you.
Yeah, my mute button disappeared there for a second. So this material started because I had the great fortune to have lunch with Brad Clark. And I explained to him what I was doing, and I think I said at some point I'm turning cost models on their head. So that's where the cover slide comes from. And that's also from one of my favorite movies, A Fish Called Wanda. And so any chance I get to use a picture from that, I'm going to take advantage of it. So that's why that's there. And then there's the mandatory Dilberts, which you can all get later when I share these. Last week or the week before, I was reading this blog that I follow from the data scientist at Google. And it struck me as giving context for what I wanted to talk about today, that management needs to have decision criteria based on well-designed metrics. And the ability to collect the data those metrics are based on, and then the skills to analyze the data. And I think that's something I try to keep in the back of my mind when I'm building cost estimates, because more and more over the past 10 years, the estimates I work on start with the developers and end up going up the management and food chain in my organization, all the way up at some points to the board of directors at the National Security Agency. So it becomes critical that I can communicate those estimates effectively and efficiently and clearly. So that's where I'm starting this conversation. So I think it might be time to revisit our estimation practice to make better data-driven decisions. And what am I talking about? I'm estimating effort with most fund models, not cost. The bid and proposal process right now makes it extremely inefficient to use the cost capability in the cost models. So most of what I'm generating to go into those bases of estimates is labor estimates. And then our development practices have evolving: Agile, DevOps, DevSecOps. So that's changing the way we put our estimates together, the resources and the activities and the time span for the releases of the products. This is intersected with the maturation of cloud-based technology and the movement of standalone servers to the cloud. So what's happening in most instances is the software teams are no longer standing up and managing their own servers. And a lot of the capabilities like security and logon that they used to have to add on their applications are now being handled by the enterprise on the cloud. So that's impacted the effort that goes along with standing up a product. Software teams are no longer providing effort for the IT infrastructure. Software that's moved to a managed service. So that's also increased the efficiency of the software teams. And that software factories are providing common tools for software teams already installed and pre-configured, so the team doesn't have to stand those up. So that little bit of time at the beginning of a project when you had to put Jira in place, install your development tools, has been mitigated to a very significant extent. Plus, you're seeing more and more organizations standardize on a common set of tools that they're putting in containers and having available to the teams. So you have more common development practices and tool usage across the organization. And then the scope of these tools and the cross integration and the data sharing that they have has improved drastically in the last 5 years. I mean, leaving NSA in 2 years ago, the first thing I did when I came to GDIT was look at the tool suite that we had in our software factory offering. And it took me about 2 weeks to plow through all the tools and to understand where the commercial market had gone with data sharing that NSA had not. So the possibility for digital data collection has significantly increased in the last 5 years. And I think the pandemic might actually have improved that somewhat because of the remote work environments people set up. So we should take advantage of those tools evolution to collect data faster, better, and cheaper, and enable better decision making. Scheduling and staffing have changed. The normal curves don't fit anymore. I have an example later on in this, but I'm bidding on a huge billion-dollar project now where we're providing teams of 8 to 10 people at fixed staffing levels. So there's no ramp up, there's no ramp down. It's 10 people releasing software every 2 months. So that's a different scheduling model than you're going to see in our traditional Kokomo and True Planning and SEER. So that's something we need to look at downstream to see how we're going to accommodate that. And then we can do a better job communicating the hows and whys of our estimate. The shorthand labels and the abbreviations that the cost community knows, it's like taking our estimates and converting them to Latin and then having to explain what the words mean when we talk to our stakeholders and board of directors. So we need to do a better job of that part of the conversation if we're going to have better data-driven decisions. So things have changed. Things that we could count on 20 years ago, like Tom Brady leading the league in passing, and the Patriots winning the division, not so much anymore. Or, sorry, Dan, Alabama with 2 losses this part of the season. I mean, that shocked the hell out of me, buddy. I'm sorry I had to put that up there, but you know, we can't count on everything staying the same year in and year out. And in the last 20 years, things have changed. So I think we need to look at changing some of the ways our models work. Now, there have been some cool things that happened. I don't know if anybody else followed this, but there's a new digital issue of the Beatles Revolver album. Peter Jackson, when he did the Get Back tapes, processed the audio and video using AI and machine learning.
See if I can actually get some additional.
And he was able to isolate the single voice tracks and the instrumentation tracks and gave that to Giles Martin, and he remixed the album. So machine learning and AI and software have brought the Beatles up into 2022 and given us a whole new sound for their albums yet. So I thought that was a timely thing that just came up this week. My daughter mailed me a link to this. It's a National Geographic article. So, and Rick, your comments struck me significantly, particularly the value setting from Barry, because we're dealing with some big acquisitions now, and the government's asking us to help them put safe practices, agile safe, scaled agile framework in place, and to help them implement not the technology part of it, but the soft skills part, the communication and the change management aspects of it. And so one of the core aspects of that is organizing around value. And this comes out of the lean community, it comes out of the agile, and it's communicating a value stream up the food chain, which is the same thing Barry was talking about 15 and 20 years ago with value. And by discussing value from the project up to the board of directors, you can make a more efficient communication flow and enable better decision making. And so you have different value streams. You have operational value streams that fulfill a product, fulfill an order, treat a patient, provide a loan, and development services. And then you have manufacturing value streams, software streams, and supporting value streams. And one of the things that's happened in the last 5 or 6 years, there's a concept of infrastructure as software. So things which were done manually or with hardware before, like compliance and audits and security checks, are now being delivered as software capabilities. So the footprint of the software product value streams has also been extending across different parts of the application, much like that data point Barry showed where in Rick's presentation. And the key takeaway from this slide is that development value streams contain the people and services who develop the solutions used by the operational value. So it's all the resources needed to provide the software and the operational and the production capability and the security and the audit if that's required. So a team of 8 to 10 people is going to have all of those capabilities built in on the team. So the resource mix that we're putting on the table to staff the solution is different than we classically would put in place with a legacy software product. And then one of the ways we're looking at is looking at software project value streams. And I imposed this on Kevin McKeel's at Log Apps and some of the machine learning we're trying to do on automated function point counting so we can flag features, defects, risks, and debt out of the ticket issues that are coming into the system and better identify them. And the reason I think this is important is if you just look at the features and you don't look at the balance between defects, risks, and debt, you're going to have significant variation in what the cost is for your product. And also, if you ignore defects and risks and debt issues, you may be blocking enablers of improvements of efficiency on the system. So this needs to be part of the communication up the management stream. It goes above the product owner, but it needs to be communicated at the stakeholder level when you're looking at the budgets and the priorities and the spending at the corporation level. So the other part of this is organizations are more and more looking at epics and features as a way of communicating from the top down to the team about what they want to do with their products. And user stories are great at the team level, but every team does the user stories differently. GAO recommends that we standardize on feature descriptions when we look at this. And since the value stream is also using features, it's something I've started using when I size my systems and I report my metrics at the feature level. And this is in here to show you that this information flow from the user story up to the top to the epic and the capability, and then back down again, is being used across the entire organization. So this is a path for us to improve our communication with the management team about what we want to deliver and what we want to build. And it's in place in a lot of organizations now, and a lot of government agencies like IRS and DHS are adopting this in part, if not in whole. So it gives us a path to improve the communication and make better choices. So software engineering has evolved, and we need to involve our estimation tools also to grow along with it. And I think we need to look at Kokomo 3 or Kokomo X and look at what Agile, DevOps, Cloud, Software Factory, and the impact they've had on the cost drivers, outputs, and where machine learning and AI may impact this, infrastructure as software, 5G, and the depth and breadth of the tool integration that are supporting our development teams. And those all factor in where we need to go with the next generation of Kokomo. And then this is an IRS example. It's a $2.6 billion application development project. And they want to talk about scope enhancements, but there's no requirements given with this. And they wanted to standardize on something called points, where they were awarding 1 point for every dollar spent on the contract, because their developers told them that user stories didn't work and they couldn't scale up, so they made up their own point scale. So I think we need to come to the table with better solutions than that going forward. So Kokomo 3, size imports is source code based, working on function points and snap points, so I applaud that. The cost drivers have evolved from waterfall and are written in a private language understood by the cost estimators, but we need to make them more clear to the rest of the stakeholder path involved in communicating. Requiring a translation for those impedes the efficiency of communicating the cost estimate up the management chain. For those of you who don't know, that's a punch card. which is how we used to originally estimate with the Kokomo model. So to start the conversation, we like to look at business value, high, average, and low, and then the complexity of the implementation cost, and that's how we structure the information conversation with the stakeholders and the product owner. Source code is actually still going to be extremely useful to us because the new tool environments actually let me track lines of code back to a business function. So I can tell you how many lines of code a particular business function has in my new system. I can tell you if it's a piece of developed code, if it's a library, if it's a piece of COTS or free and open source software. So that should make measuring source code in the future easier to accommodate. And software factories can build this analysis in their delivery framework. The hooks are already in there to report this. A shout out to Cheryl Jones. That digital engineering framework, new version that you just put out is an amazing document. And we're actually looking at that to apply as a template internally at GDIT to see where we can accommodate the reports in our software factory outputs and collect the data digitally. So I gave you a reference to that down at the bottom of that page. Function points. I think function points are a good starting point, and Wilson Rosa has a great paper along with Sarah Jardine that they're going to talk to later. But there's a couple of issues I have with function points. As with our cost driver settings, it has its own language and terminology. So if I get above a product owner level, they don't understand what the function point counts are. However, there's two principal components to the function point count: the data, objects or entities, and the transactions. And I have had great success communicating the amount of logical data entities in the transactions that my developers are building to implement the feature. So that's how I communicate my function point data. I use the raw data when I talk up and down the food chain about how much things cost and what the costs are going to be. And that we can use that to relate back to the value stream. So if I have a business feature that's worth $300,000 to implement, I can trace the source code back to it. I can get the function point count, but I can also tell my management team there's 3 database components that we have to add for this, and there's 14 transactions. I've actually standardized that on a feature basis, which we're going to talk about next. So I had looked at a variety of things, from early and quick function points, and then simple function points. And then IFPUG did a study recently on the latest ice bags release. And one of the things they had in there was a file mapping model to look at cost, effort, size per file. And so what I'm doing now is when I go into a new customer and we want to talk to them about feature size, we default to a feature size of 1 logical data entity, and then 5 transactions related to that. And I usually talk about the transactions as create, update, delete, read, and report. And then we use that for the initial pass through costing out the features that they want delivered. And so we talk about, we can deliver you 14 features with this. And then over time, we evolve this based on the particular business model. Like at NSA, we did this and applied it to analytics. And we had a simple and medium and a complex analytic where the amount of data entities and transactions increased depending on the significance. So I'm repeating that and refining it. So for example, a single feature in this case has 1 data object. We've identified 7 transactions. It's a process control application built by an experienced team, used as a software factory for development. It's all new development built in Java, commercial development standard, high reliability. Total effort for single feature, 275 hours. And then we add in PM overhead of 19 hours, 54 hours for architecture, and the Agile team, 203.25 hours. So that's how we're communicating our feature cost up the management chain when we talk to the product owner and the stakeholders. And then I developed using Seaver and True Planning a graph of different application types and how using that standard feature, how the hours per feature varies as the applications become more and more complicated. And usually what drives the complexity is, as I go down that list, I'm becoming more and more real time, and I've got more and more complicated algorithms involved with the application. So this is also ties into the single feature. We say, all right, if you've got a simulation application, it's going to be more expensive, it's going to cost more. And we've extended that further. So I've extended this to cover low-code solutions, 4GL, Java, and Python to give them a mix. So we can talk to the product owner about what technical capability we need to use to build the feature and what the mix might be. So a feature might have a mix of low code and Java. And so we can accommodate that with this kind of framework. And so this is how that template looks when you present that for the initial conversation with the product owner. Team size is 7 months, 6 months schedule, hours per FTE per year, total hours, what kind of application it is, if it's business system, no code, low code solution. And we can do new features a maximum of 114 and modified features 377. So in that case, where the IRS isn't telling us what capability they want to deliver, we can say, here's the mix of features we think we can build for you with these assumptions about the technology and the team experience. So how does that impact Kokomo 3? So product and platform attributes. So I think the impact of software failure needs to be revisited. If I'm delivering things in 2-month increments, I think the impact of failure has been mitigated somewhat, so we may need to revisit that. Product complexity, I think, needs work. That's one in particular where I've always had a hard time explaining the Kokomo complexity cost driver to a product owner and stakeholder when we went through it, which is why I came up with the application list to replace that. So that's what I'm doing right now. Develop for reusability. If I'm doing continuous integration and continuous delivery, I think the impact of reuse has also been affected, and reuse costs have probably been mitigated somewhat. I haven't seen any evidence that yet, so that's something I'm hoping to work on, but I know in conversations with my development teams, they think the reuse numbers we're getting out of the models when we apply the inputs are too high. Security needs work. Right now, the security cost driver is looking at it as a project-based driver, and I think this is becoming more of a system architecture driver. So I think we need to revisit that. The platform constraints and platform volatility, I think cloud and factory have also implicated those. So those need additional work and probably some rework for the next iteration. The personnel attributes, I think, need to be revisited. I don't see analysts and programmers on my teams anymore. I see agile team and I see scrum master. And then I see SMEs depending on what the circumstances are. If it's a biometrics application that's doing machine learning and AI to look at fingerprints, I would have a biometrics expert. I may have a data engineer or a data analytics specialist added to the team, but I no longer see analysts and programmers. The other thing I'm seeing is my system engineering or architecture activity is very often just a normal member of the agile team and not called out as a specific resource. The other thing I'm seeing a lot with the government work is the government is specifying what the resource requirements are. So they'll say, I want someone with 5 to 10 years experience. So the input for the experience levels on the application teams is also being taken off the table on a lot of these bids, whereas the government's specifying what that is. So that changes our approach to using the tool. The project attributes. Precedentedness, I'm not sure what to do with this one yet. I think having 2-month releases or even shorter releases may need that one to be revisited. Development flexibility, risk opportunity management, and software architecture understanding. I also don't know that those currently apply the way they're written. I think they need to be revisited, but I don't have a solution for those yet. Stakeholder team cohesion, this would default to a high or extra high setting in most of the circumstances I'm seeing. And then I think the software tools in particular needs to be rewritten. I believe I've got a chart on that later. Multi-site development also, I think, needs rework. Our ability to communicate even internationally across time zones has improved significantly. And the development tools that we can now bring to the table also mitigate a lot of the prior limitations on multi-site development. Required development schedule is release cadence now of every 2 months. Does that mean we need to revisit the way we're doing our schedule calculations? I think it does. I haven't looked at Wilson's schedule analysis yet out of his current paper, but I'm seeing most of these things. I've got a team of 8 people. They're working on this for the whole year. So the schedule, every 2 months, I've got a release. So it's not a normal distribution curve like the traditional models provide. And most of the other estimators I've talked to about this in the last year are coming to the same conclusion. Yeah, so this is the depth and breadth, I think, out of SEER of the tool setting. And if we look at nominal interactive programming workbench or nominal plus visual programming CM tools and simple test tools, that's not a nominal setting anymore. The nominal setting is more at the very high level from what I'm seeing with the current development tools. And it may be we need to move very high down to nominal and revisit what the high and very high cost drivers in this one in particular, particularly with DoD extending the depth and breadth of software factories. I think this is something that's going to need some significant analysis in the next year. So that's something, Anandi, I'm hoping you and I can talk about later on. Automated analysis, peer reviews, and execution testing and tools. I was pleased to see that last one in there because I think that's where we need to go with the tool drivers. So I don't know what the stake is in those yet. I haven't had any chance to do any analysis on that yet. And then the application super domains, I think, is a good initial start. But AIS is one bucket in there. And I think we need to extend that. I mean, I think even Dan Strickland's systems and some of the missile systems I'm seeing are recognizing that the IT infrastructure parts of the system that go along with the classically mission-facing part of the applications are all intersected. So that needs to be revisited. So that's it. Are there any questions?
Yeah, hi, it's Rick. I just had a comment, David. Excellent presentation. I think this, reflecting on the summary that Brad gave earlier regarding the organizational goals going forward, and then also with the specific ideas from David's presentation, I'm just offering it as a thought. I know Brad said the new organization is not going to primarily emphasize, research and development, really more on the, the collaboration and dissemination. However, a Kokomo, my comment is as follows: a Kokomo 3 vision as a way to unify some of the activities, I think, is particularly attractive. What form the model would take, what's the data source, how do we make decisions, so forth and so on. I mean, obviously we can work out, those details, but I just want to emphasize that I think that would be one thing that would sort of unify and provide like a work product that we're working toward that would add a lot of value. So just sharing that with the group.
I agree. And one of the things I'm hoping we can do out of the new community is find the way to share and collaborate on some of these issues, which are going to impact all of us. I think that's one of the things that the Kokomo community it was excellent at over the years, and I hope we can continue that collaboration because it's a neutral way for government and industry to talk and collaborate with each other.
Yeah, excellent. I totally agree. And back to the role of the organization itself, the BEAM, CSSC organization effectively provides a CSS. It provides a CCB, a change control board for like what the model is. Okay, like we have, the organization would be able to say, hey, this is version, whatever, 1.0, 1.5, things like that of the model, and that provides the clarity there. So the organization has a very clear role in that. Beyond the collaboration, beyond the sort of bringing together the community, it can provide the ability to say, hey, this is the model, and these are updates we're considering, and these are systematic ways to execute all that.
Yeah, Dan Strickland, your question. I haven't seen it as much, the level staffing on big DoD SRDR acquisitions. Where I have seen it are on the smaller ones, which aren't subject to SRDR data collection. And in the things we're being asked to bid on at that level, say 30 application developers. So I'm seeing that as more of a consistent model.
Dave, I've got a comment. This is Brad.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Didn't know if you can hear me, so I can't tell if my mic's on or off.
No, I was just reading Dan Strickland's comment that my briefing sucked.
I think it might have been the Alabama comment, but Kokomo 3 has kind of a focus of plan-driven, more of a traditional 1990s development type methodology, but perhaps a new Kokomo model, as there have been many additional Qualmos and other types of something, a co-devmo or a co-devopsmo, kind of drawing a little bit from the drivers in Kokomo, but really looking at the things that you've brought up, one of them being the steady state staffing and these predicted or set release cycles. It seems to me like what you'd be doing is predicting how much functionality can be, how many features, for instance, could be implemented in that time frame, given different factors that impact the project. The experience, the number of SMEs, those kinds of things, which Kokomo 3 doesn't address. So I'm just thinking maybe
that's exactly where I was going with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we need to look at where we can estimate capability for the client up front and then measure it as we go forward. And that's the real strength of this approach. So we can estimate function points, we can estimate features, we can show historically what the code mix has been for this, and then communicate that effectively up through the value stream.
Right, and they could decide then what things they want in this next set of releases based on the capability to produce those things, and it might be a changing priority over time, but at least it gives them that information of what they're their bucket size is for producing something in the next release.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been doing this for longer than I want to say, but one thing that hasn't changed is the amount of data that's required to meet the minimum viable product of initial operation capability is typically a key driver of what the eventual system cost is going to be. And that's something that the product owner, the stakeholders, and the board of directors need to know when you communicate the estimate up to them. And that's why I like to take the function points out of the count and talk about the number of data objects.
That makes sense. Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for asking me to do it.
I owe you lunch.
All right, we'll set that up. Thank you all very much. It's wonderful to see everybody here, especially Dan Liggett.
Thank you, David.